Welcome to The Guardians, a podcast by Independent Trustee Services. Here, we explore the conversations that matter in protecting South Africa's retirement future, from governance and compliance to independence and member protection. Each episode brings you insights from experts and industry leaders with one clear purpose: to help trustees, employers, and members build stronger, safer retirement funds. Welcome to today's episode of the Independent Trustee Services podcast. I'm your host, Lungile Sebotsane, and I'm delighted to have you with us. Our discussion today is about the theme that lies at the heart of everything that we do: independence. When we talk about independence, it's not just about a corporate slogan. It is a principle that safeguards fairness, transparency, and trust. Independence is especially critical in the area of employee benefits, where decisions made by boards of trustees directly affect the retirement security, health, and financial well-being of millions of South Africans. South Africa has a unique, complex benefits landscape. Pensions and provident funds are central to people's financial futures, yet these funds carry risks of mismanagement, conflicts of interest, and governance challenges. Independent trustees play a vital role in protecting the interests of members, ensuring that funds are administered responsibly and that compliance with the Pension Funds Act and related legislation is upheld. In this episode today, we will explore why independence is not only necessary, but a vital structure of employee benefits. We will look at how independent trustees will strengthen governance, prevent conflicts, and give employees the confidence that their hard-earned contributions are being safeguarded. So joining me today, we have Mr. Henry Dul, who brings valuable insights into this discussion. Henry, welcome to the podcast today.
Lungi, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
And now to kick it off, first question, so that we can have a frank discussion. Tell me first about independence. What is it?
That's a very good question. People often claim they are independent or talk about Chinese walls and things like that, but are they really independent? Do they have vested interest or don't they have vested interest? If you look at retirement funds and definition of an independent trustee in retirement funds, there's no official definition. Companies sponsor funds, often run by insurance companies or large administrators, appoint so-called independent trustees. If you go and look at them, you'd see, but they actually, until recently, used to head up the department that actually managed the services given to the funds. Yet they claim to be independent because they're no longer employed by the sponsor of that fund. So independence is, in a way, also a mindset. It's a way to act totally independently, to be uninfluenced. When we talk about independent trustees specifically, and I believe in independence much wider than just on a trustee level. But if you talk about independent trustees specifically, it's not enough to just be independent. You also have to have a moral standing, to stand up for what is right, to take on the powers to be and fight for what's right for members and funds.
Let's look at the areas where you've got business going. You've got clients already where you are independent trustees. How is this benefiting the funds? How is this benefiting the members of these funds?
There's a couple of, I think, benefits that you can get from it. First of all, you get a certain skill set. So if you get an experienced professional trustee, and that's also very important, because I've seen companies that employ, lack of a better word, a gardener as a sponsored trustee, or sponsor will employ the gardener as an independent trustee. Somebody without knowledge of any understanding of how retirement funds work, just so that they can say they've got independence. Now you've got to remind me what your question was again. I got carried away there.
No, that is okay. I was saying to you, in terms of the benefits that you're offering to your clients, you've got already a list of clients that you're servicing as an independent trustee.
Yes.
The company does that. How is this benefiting the company, or even particularly more interest, how is this going to benefit members of these funds?
Okay, yes, that's where we were going. Thanks for reminding me. So yes, if you get, in addition to the independence, you also get certain skill set. There's certain things, I've been in this industry for around 40 years. There's certain things that I know where to look at. What do certain service providers do? Where do people, and most service providers, let me just make that clear, most service providers, skilled, professional people, but sometimes they do double dipping, what I call double dipping. They would charge you for fees or for services that you actually don't use and you don't need, or it's already been provided by other people. I can look at those kind of things, or any professional trustee can look at that kind of thing. Financial statements. We as general boards of trustees accept if a financial statement's been audited, that it's correct.
Yeah.
You've got to go and ask certain questions about it. And
we've seen with the latest things in the media where a company relied on auditors and
absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. So in that case, and we spoke about in previous podcasts about that as well, where the auditor just didn't fulfill their duty. So you've got to know the right questions you've got to ask the auditor as well. Don't think because it's been audited, it is correct. I've had another case where there was an entry into the financial statements, a couple of million rand, that was in transit. And when I asked the administrator about it, they actually admitted, well, we don't know where this money is. We're looking for it and we'll find it. Don't worry, we'll find it. But we don't know where it is.
But it has been reported.
It's in the financial statements and it says in transit. So if you don't know what to ask, you wouldn't know what the answer is, what's lying behind all those things. And then an independent mindset is important. If you, and unfortunately, umbrella funds has become, I wouldn't say unfortunately, but rephrase that. Umbrella funds has become popular, and they certainly have their space in the industry.
Well, before we move on, umbrella funds, you see, you're already in the industry, you're giving us 40 years of experience. But to a layman, what are these umbrella funds that we're talking about?
That's a very good question. You get two types of umbrella funds. You get what I like to call an open umbrella fund and a closed umbrella fund. A closed umbrella fund would typically be a company that's in some way linked to each other that belongs to one fund. There's no necessarily direct shareholding between them, but they are linked. And then they belong to both funds. They will have similar benefit structures and similar rules, or the same kind of rules for their members. You get an open umbrella or sponsored umbrella fund, which is then a fund that's been started by a sponsor who's got an economic or financial interest in that fund. So they're either administrators or they're asset managers or even consultants, and they start an umbrella fund where they then call the sponsor, and they've got certain rights as a sponsor on what they can do. They can appoint trustees. They would appoint normally 50% of those people will be sponsored trustees. And then, as you know, Section 7B of the, could be A, you must check that out. Just cut it out, make sure it's correct. 7A or 7B of the pensions fund clearly states that half of the trustees must be elected by the members. It's difficult in umbrella fund to have elections, so they can apply for exemption from elections, subject to them appointing independent trustees.
There is a special application they need to do to the FSCA?
They apply to the FSCA and they get exemption, and then they can appoint independent trustees, so-called independent trustees. And there's some companies that really appoint independent trustees, and there's some companies that appoint people that's very closely linked to them. Those are sponsored umbrella funds. They would then go, and that fund would be open to anybody to participate, any participating employer to participate in that fund.
Okay. Now you are here representing Independent Trustee Services, ITS for short. If you were given an opportunity to become a fund administrator as a company, and there was a big fund that needed your assistance, your expertise of over 40 years and everything else, how would that then affect your independence? Would you be able to go out looking for independent business and still be objective as an administrator in that fund?
I think you're walking a very thin line. You would run around and you would probably say, I've got Chinese walls between the consulting side and the administration side. But if the administrator pays your salary for you, how can you criticize the administrator? And I'm not meaning criticize in a bad way, but how can you check that an administrator does what he's supposed to do? And everybody makes mistakes. Administrators make mistakes. It's always how you deal with those mistakes. If you hide those mistakes, then nobody will really know what's going on. So if you're the consultant and the administrator of that, you can easily hide those mistakes. How many mistakes are actually happening and how many gets resolved? So if you're not independent, you're not independently asking those questions, you might never know what a
There's a lot to
situation
hide.
is. There is certainly, I've seen some scary matters in the industry of errors, and not even errors, other things as well that gets hidden from the trustees. And if you don't know the right questions, or your consultant is not independent and doesn't know the right questions, they will get away with that.
Now, this industry is driven by the Pension Funds Act. Is there any requirement in that act that says funds should have independent trustees?
Unfortunately not. The Act states 50% of the trustees must be elected by members, at least 50%, so you can have more, and 50% can then be appointed by the employer. As I said, in umbrella funds, you can get exemption. Other funds, you can also get exemption, but you need a good reason why you apply for exemption. But an umbrella fund, it could be expensive to manage trustee elections. So you can get exemption from that and then appoint independent trustees. As I mentioned before, my biggest concern is not necessarily the independence of that trustee. Well, the name of the independent trustee, but it's the actual independence of that trustees. Secondly, the moral standing of that independent trustee. Thirdly, the knowledge of that independent trustee. There's some funds, some sponsors that would have a number of funds and would have the same trustees on all their funds, which makes sense. I've got nothing against that. But if that's the only income of that independent trustee, or if it's a big portion of his income of that independent trustee, how independent can you be?
Yeah.
I've had cases where I was an independent principal officer and my services were terminated when I asked certain questions. In actual fact, in this case, I informed the board, I said, I've got to report you in terms of the Act to the FSCA. And they said, no, you don't need to. And I said, well, let me see counsel. And if counsel says I don't need to report you, I'll be comfortable not to report you. Otherwise, I've got to report you. They refused me consulting with counsel, which I then reported him. And the very next trustee meeting, what do they have on the agenda? The continuance of the contract of the independent principal officer. And obviously they did not continue my appointment.
So which means then you were supposed to be a figurehead sitting there and saying yes to everything.
Exactly.
So independence really in name, but not in action.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you expose yourself by relying on that as your only income or big portion of your income, how can you be independent?
Yeah, that is true.
It would be fantastic, back to your question, it would be fantastic if some regulation comes out on what should be an independent trustee. It should include not only what independence should be, but also who they should report to. Should there maybe be an independent body? The auditor's got an independent body. The financial, the CFA, Certified Financial Analyst, have an independent body where you can go and you can complain if they don't do what they're supposed to do. Shouldn't the same apply for independent trustee?
That is my point exactly, that there should be a certain legal process that can be followed that says, okay, starting now, looking at these funds and having seen how other funds were not run properly and members lost most of their benefits, that we need to then introduce independence as a legal requirement into these structures. Yeah? Then maybe then there could be a change in legislation that then makes up for that.
There's an interesting concept that applies in other countries, and I think Australia is one of them, where you actually got an independent trustee firm that will manage the fund for you. So it is a board, or it's a company. I don't know this 100% the structure, but it's a company that serves then totally as your board on that fund. And they've got to report back to the employer, they've got to report back to the members. So they're still subject to the employer and the member scrutiny. And obviously scrutiny of the regulator. But our professional people that manage the fund independently. It might be a solution that you should think of in South Africa, especially the bigger funds. There's so many employers at the moment that say, we are too busy. We are too busy to manage the affairs of the fund. And if you look at it, there's so much compliance requirements at the moment. Some trustees will tell you that just to do the trustee toolkit, which is a minimum requirement now for a trustee, to do that with the regulator, takes 16, 18, 20, 24 hours to complete. And that's just to qualify yourself as a trustee. And that's a minimum qualification. So you can understand that senior people in companies are very involved in running the company, haven't got time to serve on the boards and manage these boards or these funds properly. So maybe there's a
spend
position.
a lot of time writing exams and sitting in audits and yes.
Yeah. I mean, now recently we've introduced a cybersecurity policy, and each trustee must, as part of the cybersecurity conduct standard, will have to attend training with regard to cybersecurity. That takes time out of your day, and employers don't want to actively participate in that anymore. So maybe it's time that we, as an industry, think about professional trustees running the fund for you in totality. You have to have good scrutiny and got to make sure you appoint the right people. But even if you manage those companies and they've got certain reporting requirements, you also reduce the risk and you reduce the work that's required from the regulator to manage funds better.
Yeah. Now let's look at the current regulatory framework, the current environment that we're operating in. Is there enough regulation to make sure that funds operate optimally? And if so, why are they not all succeeding? Why do we have so much failure? Why do we have so many things that get referred back to the FSCA? And is the FSCA doing enough to do that? And how can then independent trustees assist in that area?
Well, if you look at the regulation, let's use a simple example. You're not allowed to kill somebody. Murder is not allowed.
Yeah.
Yet people do that. So how effective is regulation? Regulation is effective for those people that applies it. The people that don't apply it, they get away. Strictly speaking, they get away with murder.
That's a nice example. That's a wonderful example. Yeah.
So regulation is helpful, but maybe we're in a situation where we over-regulate it, and we should bargain more on back to the moral standards of the trustees, of the board. I've seen many instances where, and you can understand it, the boards uncover certain irregularities, but they don't want to take it further because there's a reputational risk involved.
Yeah.
Or it requires a lot of your time to take it further. And I understand that. But if you've got independence on that board and somebody that can do it for you, maybe that will resolve a lot of the problems as well.
Yeah. Difficult one.
It's
a difficult one. We've got the tools. We're just not using the tools properly.
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
What you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, let's go back and look at the representation on, say, committees when you're looking at your clients, especially now that we have also unions playing a role in some of these decision-making structures. How do you manage conflict of interest in areas like that where you have employee representatives, you've got employer representatives? How do you deal with that?
It's not always easy.
Yeah.
The theory is that you are one body and you don't have an employer trustee hat on and you don't have a member or a union trustee hat on. And there's cases in law that says you should act independently. But in practice, that often is a problem. You would also see service providers that would market through unions, which there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not complaining or I'm not criticizing it. But it creates animosity between boards and the employer and the union representatives in many cases. You should market effectively through the board and the board only, because that's a decision maker in the end. But it's business. People looking for ways to get business. It's a legal way to get business, but it does sometimes create animosity in that situation. I think what is important, where we're lacking in general in the industry is with regard to our code of conduct. PF 150 require you to have a code of conduct. What we have done, I think in general, and I'm generalizing, I'm sure there's fantastic exceptions to this, but we tend to take the proposed code of conduct that the FSCA gave together with PF 150 and we implement that. How effective is that? How can you, As a trustee, let's argue your code of conduct say if you don't attend 2 meetings or more than 2 meetings in a row without apologies or valid apologies, you will be removed as a trustee. How can the board remove the managing director of that company if he doesn't attend the meetings?
Yeah.
So your code of conduct must speak to that clearly. You must probably be more adamant on it will be automatic. Instead of a valid excuse, it will be automatic. Or how do you deal with an excuse? What is an excuse and how do you analyze an excuse? You must have more, call it meat around that bone to be able to address that situation properly.
Yeah. Because then obviously people in senior positions tend to flex their authority and choose not to follow those types of rules.
Absolutely. It depends again on the person. And you'll get managing directors that are fantastic, that do not impose their will on boards, or senior people that sit on board that will not impose their will on the boards. But the other side also apply. One must find a way to manage that properly if that applies.
Now, let's talk about this again. Maybe then this time I'm asking you to give us a story, of your experiences, how Independent Trustee Services has come to help in resolution of conflict in areas where you participate on some of these committees or boards.
Look, I think the fact that you are independent, and if it is, depending on what creates the conflict, if it is a employer-employee conflict, then the fact that you are independent and the fact that you know the industry, that you know the best principles, the best way to deal with certain things, or maybe not always the best, but the better way to deal with certain things, you can always put that on the table and you can distance yourself from this animosity between the two groups. Ideally is to get rid of the animosity. I prefer, where I'm involved, prefer that we don't talk about member trustees, that we don't talk about employer trustees, we talk about the trustees. That's what we are. The industry in general, however, got down who's the employer trustee, who's the member trustee. And it's not something you're going to change overnight.
Yeah.
But there shouldn't be any distinction between the two. They're both equally responsible for what happens in the fund.
Yeah. Now let's go back. There was another challenge that came in, and I'm wondering how independence could have assisted in this whole environment. Last year, they introduced the two-pot system. And then with that, a lot of things came to the front. We realized that a lot of members, I'll call them members for this discussion, thought they had a provident fund or a pension fund. And then only to realize that monies were being deducted, but contributions were not paid to any place at all. And then they're now left out in the cold. If there was a real independence, how could this have been sorted and maybe even stopped from happening?
I think you've got a very valid point. Why is this happening? People often ask, why is this happening?
Yes.
How can this happen? It's the responsibility of the Board of Trustees to see that the contributions get paid over. The Act is clear. The standards are clear on what you're supposed to do. There's a whole process set out on what you should do. Yes, maybe the criminal investigation fails you a little bit. But that those trustees follow the full process. And one of those steps is that you've got to inform the members. At a certain stage, you've got to inform the members and tell the members your contributions are not being paid over to the fund. And that way, at least the members can either use the unions that they belong to or any workplace structure to raise this matter and to deal with this matter. Those trustees that allow that clearly is a derelict of their duties. If they haven't followed, not all, of course, if you follow the full process, then you've done what you're supposed to do. You can't go and use a hitman to go and get the contributions from the employer. Yeah. But you can follow the full process set out in law. Also civil proceedings. There's also civil proceedings available to you to follow the process on that.
And then now, is there a legal requirement in South Africa that says because you are employed at company A, you have to become a member of a fund? What I'm saying is all employers forced by law to have funds, retirement funds for their employees.
No. If you look at systems overseas in Europe and so on, it's mostly national systems has been set up, and you contribute and your employer contribute to this. There's been a lot of talk in South Africa about the national setup. I think we all at this stage very scared of any type of fund or anything that's run by government per se. So we should stay clear from something that gets run by government. But there's been a lot of talk about enforcing membership as well, automatic enrollment of membership. If I can remember, the last 20 years we've been talking about that, and maybe it will come in. It's not that easy. I was seeing an employer recently who most of the employees receive minimum wage. Can you really take another 10% or 5% of that employee's salary and put it in a retirement fund? They're barely surviving. So there's more than one side to the story. But long term, you're certainly looking for something that will provide these people with some kind of benefit when they reach retirement age.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I think we've had a wonderful discussion. I really appreciate that. Is there anything finally maybe that you'd like to add to this discussion so that members can know what to look out for?
Thanks. We spoke a lot about the independence or independent trustee, but you've got to go look further. You've got to go look at all your service providers. Are they independent? Is it a one-stop shop, or is there independence in your service providers as well? So I think that's also important. That's also something you need to achieve. Yeah, but thank you for the opportunity, and I hope we can have another podcast soon.
Thank you very much for making time. I've also learned quite a lot, and I'm thinking this is valuable information that will reach members out there. And not only just members, but also people responsible for member funds that can then look at this independence and understand exactly that we need to give choice to members of funds so that they know they have a buffet of solutions to pick from and be able to go and make the right decisions. And when they do, they need to know that they are well protected. I hope I've summarized it properly in terms of how your 40 years of experience would have taught everybody else. But thank you so much for coming through. And I hope we can then have another podcast as a follow-up on this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And bye.
Thank you for listening to the Guardians podcast, brought to you by Independent Trustee Services. If you found today's discussion valuable, be sure to share it with your network and join us for future episodes. Together we can strengthen governance, promote independence, and safeguard the future of millions of South Africans. You can catch all episodes on our website at independenttrusteeservices.co.za and follow us on LinkedIn for updates and resources.